I'm sure all you guys know here that I'm a PER mentor. I mentor a lot of students on writing PER. What I'm finding with students is that you guys don't know which areas in PER to report on. So either you're reporting everywhere or you're reporting in areas that you're not really supposed to report on. What I suggest that you do is this. Depending on your job and your role, you should write down somewhere the areas that are more applicable to you and just report in there. We have 20 technical areas in PER and 5 enabling sub areas. Those 20 areas are based on the technical competence that you have. So it is FR, MA, finance, tax, assurance, strategy. So based on that, think about your role and where it fits and report appropriately. Now, I will give you some pointers. Out of all these competencies, you really need to report on just in FR, MA, finance, and possibly assurance or tax, depending if you're in public practice or not. Anything that I didn't list in here, and looking at this, you're probably thinking it's the strategy, right? That's the one I missed over here. You should really not report on strategy because it's not really applicable to most of you guys. The stuff in strategy is more like mission and vision and code of conduct and stuff like that, and you don't really deal with it in your day-to-day jobs. As far as assurance and tax goes, please don't write anything for assurance or tax unless you work in public practice. A big mistake students make is they get involved with auditors at year end, like they prepare working papers and things like that. And they think they can report like AS number 1 or AS number 2. It doesn't really work that way. The way the PER reviewers are grading you, they want multiple examples and they want this to be part of your job description to give you any points. So if you try to get assurance 1, like AA1 or AA2, just because you're working on audit once a year, it's just not going to work. You're wasting your time. So my recommendation to students who are not working in public practice is to completely forget assurance and tax. Just throw it in the garbage, forget about it. Instead, target FR, MA, and finance. If you work in public practice, obviously reporting assurance and tax, that's applicable to you in one other area. Now, think back to the requirements to graduate from PER. You need to have a few level 2s, a few level 1s, and the rest can be level 0, and you will be completely fine to graduate that way. You actually just need about 4 level 2s to graduate. That means you have plenty of chances to get level 2. So you don't really need those other areas to graduate out of PER. So for that reason, I recommend to skip those altogether. And where you should get level 2? Well, in my opinion, the FRs and MAs are the ideal place to get level 2. And there's a few reasons for that. Number one, looking at the list of requirements to graduate from PER, you need to have something called core requirements and then depth requirements. And basically the core requirements are saying that either in FR or MA, you need to have a certain number of level 1s and level 2s. And the depth requirement is saying you need overall a certain number of level 2s. If you target FR and MA, you're going to hit 2 birds with 1 stone. So if I were you, if I'm strategizing over where I should target, I would probably go for something like this. I would go like level 2 in FR 1, 2, 3, and then maybe level 1 in FR 4, and then level 1 in MA 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's it. Okay, if I do that, sorry, I'll change my answer. Maybe 1 more level 2 in MA 1 because I need 4 of them, right? So if I do that, then I got 4 level 2s across both of them, and the rest are level 1. That's good. I can graduate that way. At that point, I don't even need to do finance, assurance, or tax, or any of the other stuff. So that's the target for people in corporate. For public practice, if I were you, I would try to get level 2 in assurance or tax, and maybe a little bit of a level 1 in maybe FR or MA. Again, with assurance or tax, you have 3 areas in there. So if you can get level 2 in all of them, you'll be solid. And then in FR or MA, I will get level 1s to get my core requirements met, and I'll be done from there. All right, so does it make sense? Do you guys have any questions about which areas to target before I move on? All right, let's talk about level 2 now. So let's say you pick your areas, and how do you actually get level 2 when you're reporting your examples? So few rules to remember when you're doing this. Number one, please don't write very point form. Over and over, I see students who just write their job duties, like they literally copy paste from their job description. I worked on variance analysis and I did this and I'm trying to claim level 2. So it doesn't work that way. Your reports for PER have to be really detailed, like pretty damn detailed. It has to be about half a page to a full page for every single example, up to a maximum of 5,000 characters. So number one, don't write too little. Secondly, whatever you're writing has to meet to what they're looking for. And you probably got this pushback from reviewers very often, right? You probably see in your PER report, they're saying, use the question marks in the PERT tool, right? And when you click on the question mark, you have no idea what that means. But one way or another, you have to click on those question marks in a PERT report, and you have to read it very carefully and understand what specifically they're asking you to do. And when you're writing your example, I strongly recommend that you take those labels from the question marks and then put them in your report. So let me give you an example. So let's say for one of the areas, it says you need to speak about like the needs of your stakeholders, the accuracy of financial reporting. This is, by the way, FR1 that I'm talking about. It's about the needs of the stakeholders, the accuracy, the constraint of the current system, etc. If you click on a question mark, it's going to give you all that stuff. What I recommend is in your example, put those things in there. Put stakeholders dash, and then write down who the stakeholders are. Write needs of stakeholders, and then write what it is. Write accuracy requirement. Why is accuracy important for your stakeholders? And write that down. And write why the current system is a constraint, etc. So by putting those labels in your report, you're making it very obvious that you know what you're talking about, that you know this is the area that I'm targeting, and then you can get depth by writing that. So this is what I mean by labels. Those question marks are a little bit tricky. I'm not going to lie to you. It took me a while to understand what is it all about, but you got to read it. And there's a lot of PDFs out there that explain what exactly they're looking for. One thing that we have very little of is examples. I really wish that the PERT team would give you like at least 5 examples for each area. Then your life will be like super easy because you can look at something and understand what they want and write that way. They just don't do it. It kind of seems to me they want you to go through the hoops and struggle a little bit, get challenged a little bit to go through it. But if you really want examples, that's something I can provide you. But you will get the hang of it. Once you go through it a couple more times and you get their feedback, you'll understand what they're looking for. All right. In the third bullet list here in my slide, I have quantity, quality, and content. So when you're writing your example, besides ensuring that the quantity is a lot, you wrote quite a bit, you have to make sure that the quality and the content of your writing is there. So by quality and content, I mean, number one, that you're hitting those marking rubrics and you're answering all the labels. And secondly, the item that you're putting does answer them. Again, I'll give you an example. Let's say for the content, they want you to speak about, I don't know, let's say some sort of improvement that you did, like a system improvement. If you write down in a very like basic format, what was this improvement for and how your team kind of implemented this new system or new improvement, it's not good. What you guys should do is you have to be, number one, very selfish. In per report, you have to use the word I a lot and stay away from using my team or my department, my manager and stuff like that. Write down what you did as a person and how you personally like achieve these things. By writing that way, you get like tick marks for the content area and you can get level 2 much, much better that way. Some other things in the content are the specific requirements you're looking for. For example, in some areas, you need to, if you look at the marking rubric, you'll see it says and or in some areas. So you will see it says you have to do this or that. You have to get one or the other. But if it says and, you have to do both of them. So read those carefully and make sure you get both of them met to get level 2 in here. Complexity and frequency are also important. So let me talk about the frequency first, because that's I get that question very often from students. Students ask me very often, Gevorg, if I use your template to write my per report, do you guarantee that I'll get level 2 here? And my answer to students when they tell me that is that I don't guarantee that, because my templates are perfect. It will for sure give you the highest amounts of points, but you need frequency to get level 2. If you write a really awesome example, but you only have one example, that's not good for level 2. They want you to write 2 to 3 examples of really complicated stuff in a really well written manner in order to get level 2. So here's the bottom line. You need 2 to 3 good examples across a couple of reports to get level 2. That means if you're at the very final stage of your reporting, you only have like one example in one area. I'm sorry, but getting level 2 is going to be very hard for you. Try to get really good examples across multiple reports and then report it as you go. That will ensure that you get to level 2 stage. So that's what frequency means. And complexity means the examples that you put, it cannot be very basic. Let's say for journal entries, FR2, I believe it's about accounting policies and transactions. Yeah, it's FR2. For that one, you have to write down some involvement you did with transactions and some analysis you did on transactions. If you write about some really basic transactions, let's say prepaid amortization, reclasses, accruals, and things like that, it is not good enough for level 2. So you have to think of some really complex examples that will be level 2 in their minds. So where do you find out what is complex, what is not complex? You can use a couple of factors to kind of judge it. Number one, if it's something that doesn't happen very often, it's considered to be non-routine. So in the eyes of peer reviewers, that's complex. Another way you can think of it is just to kind of use your judgment. If something is by nature very complex, for example, impairment of goodwill, maybe business combination, financial instruments. Just by nature, those items are pretty complex, so they will qualify in there. And if you can't think of any examples, you can write down whatever you think is complex, send it through to PER reviewers, and these guys will give you feedback and tell you, well, your example is not good enough, write down another example that will give you level 2 and so on. If you want like solid examples, that's something I can provide. I have a ton of examples across all those areas of what is complex, but I would rather that you guys kind of learn and kind of apply it and learn as you go from there. I released a video on how I teach how to write FN2. So let me walk you guys through it very quickly, and maybe you'll have some questions and maybe you'll get an idea of how to report it. Even if you're not reporting in FN2, I think this will give you a good baseline to report in your other areas. So give me 1 second, please, and I'll open it up right now. Essentially, my course is kind of like a walkthrough of these templates. I don't know if you guys can see on Zoom, but it's got 223 pages of notes. And this is not a joke. Yes, I did actually write 223 pages of notes in PER with examples. So yeah, there's a lot of content here. It will take you a few hours to go through them, but trust me, they are pretty useful. Anyways, so the way I suggest for you guys to kind of view PER and approach PER is, number one, for every section, try to understand the context. Like, what is this all about? To understand the context, this one is pretty tough, but you have to do a bit of a research on it. And I kind of already did that. I kind of explained what each section is about. So try to understand what is this about, step number one. Step number two, try to score this area if it's medium, easy, or hard. And I can already tell you that all FR and MA are easy to medium level of difficulty, while strategy is hard. Don't even target strategy. Finance is mostly medium, and enabling, you have to do it anyway. So there's no scoring for enabling at all. For the levels, I took this from the marking rubrics. I kind of went through it and I summarized what each one is about. In here, I wrote down the common job titles that you guys have to be in order to get to level 2 here, what applies to you. And then these tasks in here are what you have to do specifically. So you need to work on, for FN2, you need to work on working capital and cash flow management. So like, think about what is a working capital, right? It's your current assets, current liabilities, and the cash flow of the company. So you have to give an example of a time that you worked on working capital and one of the other requirements. So earlier I said that and or factors are important. For this one, you need to speak about one or the other. So speak about one additional item, investment portfolio, financial availability, cost of capital, whatever it may be. And down here, I'm giving you some examples. So for cash flow management, think of one of those things, like a situation where you were involved in profit distribution, investment, obtaining financing, and so on. For investment portfolio, those are some examples you can report on to get to level 2. And then this is what I suggest that you do. Put labels. So what I have over here are the labels for each area. For example, your involvement, stakeholders, working capital analysis, and write down how you were involved in this situation. Like, write how your role is involved in analysis of your company's working capital, who are your stakeholders, working capital, and so on. I built this template using the marking rubric and the ton of feedback that I've seen from reviewers. Address them one by one, describe how it ties to the cash flow, and then do this recommendation, and then complexity, discuss why it's complex, speak about the frequency, like how frequently you were involved, and then autonomy. If I were to do this for any other area, enabling or FR, it's pretty much the same. Like, a lot of things are the same. Like this recommendation, complexity, frequency, autonomy, it applies to pretty much all areas. You got to talk about recommendation, complexity, frequency, but the stuff up here changes in each area. Does it make sense? For financial reporting, they want you to do some things, but in FN, they want you to do other things. So what exactly they want you to do? This is a tough one. There's not a lot of information. The way I found that information is I checked with PER reviewers, I analyzed their feedback, and I created the template using that. And then for the additional item, you write down again how you're involved, how did you do the risk and opportunities, the recommendation, complexity, and so on. How did you address it? So hopefully this makes sense. Write down these labels, analyze each one of them one by one, and then write about it. And again, as I said in my course, I go through this one by one through every single example. And the end of each section, I give you like an example for level 2. I made those examples up myself. It talks about a situation where you were involved. Notice how I'm writing it. I write it in quite detail. I put my labels on the left side, and then next to it, I write down, recently something happened. There was a cash flow problem. And then the working capital components analyzed were this one, and so on. And then the complexity was this one. And then at the end, I made this recommendation to purchase new hedges And this resulted in smoothing of the financial statements. So here's your visual representation of what you need to submit to get to level 2. At least for FN2, this is what it should look like. Please don't copy paste this because you're going to get caught for plagiarism. Just use it to learn and then write your own example. I always say that. All right, we got a level 2 question here. It says, if I achieve level 2 for enabling competency or FRMA in the past, do I need to continue writing another example? Oh, that's very, very common question. Okay, that's a really, really good question. So if I got level 2 somewhere like long ago, should I report it again? Most of the time, people will tell you no, but my answer is yes, you should report it there again. And I'll tell you why I'm saying this. Basically, when you guys submit your reports, it's being reviewed by someone called a PER officer. Those are the people who work day by day and just check your reports and give you feedback. When you are done doing all that and you send your final report to the PER team, it gets reviewed by someone called the director. And this director person is like the manager of PER reviewers. What they do is they go back and they recheck all your prior reports. They go back, they recheck everything, and they may bring you down. Okay, so I'll give you an analogy to understand this. Imagine you pass Core 1, you pass Core 2, the electives, and you pass the CFE. And then at the end of your CFE, somebody goes back and checks all your exams and tells you that you actually failed like assurance and you have to go back and redo assurance now. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me, but that's what they do. So at the final report, they're going to go back and recheck everything. And you may lose that level 2 that you got earlier, like a year ago in your example. So if you have level 2 and you get more examples on level 2, continue to report there. Okay, while I'm waiting for the student to give me feedback, another question is, how does PPR reporting differ from EVR? The simple answer is much easier. Under PPR, you don't have to do technical competencies. You just have to do enabling competencies under PPR. And it's as easy as that. So that is the major difference. Under PPR, you do just enabling. And also, you don't really have this mentor thing that you have to find. You have someone called like the leader of your company, like a program leader, and it's automatically assigned to you. So 2 things, PPR is easier and more of the things are kind of set for you. You just have to stay in your job and you'll automatically get it all done. EVR is a bit of a nightmare. It's a little bit harder for people to hit. I'm switching from EVR to PPR and wondering, okay, so the student is saying they're switching to PPR from EVR. I think that's a great move. I think PPR is great. If you have a chance to switch to it, by all means do it. And I can tell you guys a little bit more about the switch and stuff. Maybe this is a good time for me to tell you about it. So I'm just going to change my slide over here because actually that was my final slide here. Guys, if you're under EVR, please try to change to PPR. It's a really, really good idea because under PPR, you don't have to do the technical reporting anymore. You just have to do enabling. You can either get your company to become a PPR training office, and it's super easy to do. You just file an application and they most of the time approve you as long as you have quite a number of CPAs, or just change your jobs. There's just one requirement, just make sure the next company you're moving to actually has, like they support you for your studies, they pay for your CPA dues, all those things are there, and also their PPR. If you're changing jobs just for PER reporting, I don't recommend that. I think, if you're gonna get a huge pay cut and everything is horrible in the company, just don't do it. Just make sure there's other tick marks there as well. Another student is saying, can you please explain what do you mean by PPR and EVR? It seems like you're quite new to PER reporting, so you need to kind of understand the basics. So PPR means pre-approved route and EVR means experience verification route. So if you work in a big company, most of the time public practice, you're under this PPR, which is again pre-approved route, while EVR is experience verification route. Under PPR, it means you don't have to choose where you report, which means those 20 areas that I talked to you guys about, you don't have a choice of where to report here. It's automatically decided for you. You just have to stick in your job and write a couple of enabling questions and you're done. So PPR is easy, EVR is hard. EVR, you have to choose, PPR, you don't have to choose. Okay, so there's a couple of questions mixed in the next question. I think this is a really good question for all of you guys here. It's quite important, so pay attention to this one. A student is saying that, is it possible for us to send our report to PER reviewers to get their feedback before we submit our final report? That's a good question. The answer is yes. And not a lot of people know about it or take advantage of it, but it is a good idea. So what you can do is this. If you guys go to PERT and then you go to PERT CPA PER if you're professional assessment, whatever it's called, and in there you choose your reason for sending it to PER, you will see in there it says prior report, 12-month assessment, 30-month assessment, and so on. one of the things you will see there, it says student requested. At any point, if you want the PER team to check out your reports and give you feedback, you can actually do that. There's no requirement saying you have to wait until 12 months or 30 months. At any point, you can write your report, send that professional assessment. They'll get back to you in about 4 to 8 weeks. So to answer your question, yes, you can send your reports to peer reviewers, and then they'll get back to you on it. The student also was saying that they submitted an example, or their friend submitted an example, and it was a pretty complex example. But the peer reviewer said that this person needs to repeat the budgeting cycle or similar tasks across multiple cycles. So this goes back to what I was telling you guys about frequency over here. So just because you have one complex example, and I think that's what's going on with your friend, you can get level 2. You need multiple exposures, about 2 or 3 times in the same complicated area to get to level 2. So keep that in mind. It doesn't have to be across multiple fiscal years. You just need multiple exposure to the same task. And I'll give you a little bit of a trick on this one. So the student's example was about a budgeting cycle, which I believe is covered under MA2. So because the budget happens only once a year, the student submitted a really awesome example one time, and their peer reviewer said, no level 2 for you. You got to do it about 3 times. So you're thinking you have to wait 3 years before you can get it. Here's a trick you can do to kind of bypass that frequency rule. Go see your manager, schedule a meeting with them, and make this proposal. Tell them that you're working on your CPA per reporting, and you would like to create the budget for the company on quarterly basis. All right. It doesn't have to be a budget that the company will actually use. It doesn't have to be the entire budget at all. It can be just a segment like your accounting department, and get your manager to support you, and you can create 4 budgets in a year. So quarterly budgets instead of annual budgets. By doing that, you're kind of circumventing the rule of waiting to do budget once a year. You end up doing 4 times per year, and you got 4 examples now to report on instead of like 1 example. So this is a good way to get level 2 for the MA2 competency. So basically, any public practice CPA firm is under PPR. The answer is no. You have a choice to be under PPR, and not every public practice is under PPR. That to me like makes no sense. In my opinion, every public practice should be under PPR, but that's not the way it is right now, but they can be. In my opinion, I'll be completely honest with you guys, I think every company in Canada should be under PPR. I see no reason why a company would be under EVR, not PPR. I think everybody should just send their company's description, org chart, and get CPA Canada to give them like a tick mark saying you're PPR and you're okay. But they don't do that. And I don't know why, to be honest, because to me, you should do it. Why not, really? So not every public practice is under PPR. They should be, but they're not. The question is about AA2 competency. A student is saying, can you please help me get level 2 on AA2 on how to score level 2 there? Let me just open my notes over here, just on AA2. Just 1 second, please. Remember what I said earlier. You should only report here if you work in public practice or your title is internal auditor. You said you are a financial controller. So I wouldn't recommend for you to report in here because they're going to give you a pushback. They're going to say, wow, you're a financial controller. That's amazing. But do you do internal audit every single day? And you're going to be like, no, I don't do it. And they're not going to give you level 2. So unless your title is internal auditor or external auditor, do not report in AA2. But if you're still wondering, if you still want to kind of venture into AA2, you can think of AA2 like in CPA cases, the audit planning memo. Do you remember the RAMP acronym? Risk, approach, materiality, procedures. That's AA2. You have to talk about the risk, you have to talk about the approach and materiality, and then kind of report in there. That's pretty much what they're looking for. If you're struggling to get level 2 in here, it's probably your frequency of exposure. It's probably not the way you're writing it. It's just because you don't have enough exposure in that area to get to level 2. I told you about the trick that you can report for quarterly budget, and by reporting there, you can get like 4 examples. The student is saying, do you mean you have to report in PERT every quarter for that MA2? The answer is no, you don't really have to do it. What you need 4 examples, right? So you do per reports every 6 months or so. That's the rule. I'm just going to turn off my screen here because I'm not really showing anything. You guys might as well look at me. You do per reports every 6 months. So when you begin PERT, like right at the start date, within 6 months, you do your first report. 6 months later, you do your next report. 6 months later, you do another report, and you do that up to you reach the 30-month point. So about 5 times you do that. If you have prior experience, you got to report it as well. But if you don't, that's fine. You don't have to do it. So you're going to submit PER reports about 5 times, roughly speaking. Okay. Sometimes you end up writing even more because they may reject your report. You don't get like your level 2s and you got to write it again. So it's about 5 times plus or minus a few more occasions. So in my example about the quarterly budgeting reports, you would go through a year and you would have 4 exposure to budgeting cycles. And in a year, you have like 2 6 months, right? So you can put those examples across 2 reports. Or maybe you can wait a little bit later and then write it in a future report saying, oh, last year when I was exposed to this report, I did this. There's no requirement that says your PER has to be in that exact few months leading up to the PER. You can talk about something that happened immediately before that in the previous fiscal year. It can be something like too long ago, but as long as it's in the right fiscal year or maybe the fiscal year right after that, you can write about it. It's totally fine. Oh, that's an awesome question. So should level 1 responses be done similar to level 2, but with less quantity? No. The answer is no. Level 1 responses and level 2 responses, the difference between them is not just the quantity. There are other things that factor in there. Number 1 is the complexity that goes in there. Let's go back to, let's say, FR2, which was about accounting transactions. If you give an example of an accounting transaction that you did, but it's not complex in nature, you will get level 1 for that. So complexity drives the difference between level 1 and level 2. There's other things that go there. For example, autonomy. If in your example, you said that your supervisor was very close to you, they were guiding you, they're going to give you level 1 for that. But if you say you did it all by yourself, they're going to give you level 2 on that. So pay attention to the quantity of examples, the complexity of the examples, the autonomy of how well you did. And there's actually more things. For example, like the verbs that you use also make a difference. For example, let's say you said, I prepared certain transaction, or I participated in implementing a new ERP in my company, right? I participated. That verb is a level 1 verb. Just by changing the verb that you put in there, let's say I assessed and recommended what financial system to implement, you got level 2. Okay, so be very careful about the words you choose when you write your example. Just the structure of your writing can define your level 1 and level 2. So there's multiple things that go in there. In my course, the PER review, which I don't want to turn this into a sales session, but in my course, I think about like 9 factors that differentiate level 1 and level 2, like 9 factors, and complexity and quantity is just a few of them. So there's many things that go in there, not just the frequency of exposure. Could you please give an example of identifying the CPA value impacted that we can use under enabling? So good news for you. That one is not going to be too challenging for you. So for everybody's reference, the question is this. If you guys had a chance to look at enabling competencies, they always have the CPA values in there. They're saying that you have to discuss whether your CPA values were in conflict or which CPA values were more applicable in the situation. For enabling number 1, which is about ethical dilemma, you have to speak about a conflict in your CPA values. Number 1, you have to know what CPA values we're dealing with here. There's like 5 CPA values in there. So you have to list them in your example and speak about if there's a conflict between them. I think you were knocked down to level 1 because A, you didn't even mention them at all, or if you mentioned them, you didn't say why they were in conflict with each other, or you didn't explain it. So let me give you an example. If I was doing enabling number 1, I would put a label, CPA values, and 2 dots, and I'll write in there. The CPA values applicable to the situation were, for example, integrity and due diligence. These were in conflict with each other because if I were to choose option A, it would not be in accordance with due diligence value. But if I go with option B, then it would not be in alignment with my integrity value. Because of this, there was a dilemma and conflict between my 2 values, which is why this was a very ethical challenge for me. Just FYI, enabling number 1 is one of the hardest ones to get level 2 on because they need you to speak about an actual dilemma that happened. And one thing they're looking for is the conclusion is not obvious. If you give very basic example and a conclusion is obvious, you're not going to get level 2. You have to think of a situation where you're at multiple values and those values were in conflict. And how did you come to a recommendation or how did you come to a conclusion? So list multiple values, discuss them, and explain why they were in conflict with each other. And in your second example, you said about communicating the other enabling competency. For that one, you just have to list the values. Just make sure there's multiple values, like 2 to 3 values, and kind of explain why they're more applicable. So for enabling competency on communication, I would write that The enabling competencies of, let's say, due diligence and professional behavior are applicable here because, and then just explain why they're applicable, and that should be pretty good. I'm starting in a CPA firm, but it's not under PPR. Does it mean I will be under EVR? Yes. It's very likely your firm is under PPR, like confirm with them. Go to Google and type in CPA Ontario, if you're in Ontario, and then write PPR training office and look for your company's name there. It's possible your company is already there, then you're under PPR, because I'm really doubting that your company is a CA firm or CPA firm and they're not under PPR. So double check that. If for some reason it is not, you get two choices. You can get your boss to become a PPR, go talk to them and get them to change it, or you're under EVR, which means you have to report about 8 technical competencies in addition to the enabling. Yeah, that's a great question. So a student is saying that, can I achieve level 2 while not working for an accounting firm? Like I work for a financial advisor with a bank. Yeah, you can get level 2 while working in a bank. Totally. I mean, of course, you don't have to work in a public practice firm. So what I recommend for you is to go to the FN or finance section of the PERT and just report in there. You probably have a ton of examples for finance. Write down what you did and also write down a few examples for financial reporting if you had any exposure, or for you, more likely, it's probably going to be management accounting. So write down in there. A student is asking me if they can get an extension on PER because of some circumstances. Typically, yes, they do. I can tell you guys a quick story. I was coaching a student on PER. They were in a really dire situation because their deadline for finishing their PER was this last summer. It was June 2021, and they were missing a bunch of level 2s. So they were in a really tough position. So they asked me for help, and I helped them write their reports and submit it. We did a great job. We submitted, and the reports were amazing, of course. The problem is when the reviewers looked at it, they said that one of the companies that the student worked for was kind of like before they began their PEP review. So it didn't like kind of meet the cutoff. So they didn't recognize any experience from that really old experience. So the student of mine didn't have enough to get to level 2s and graduate from PER. And PER team said, good job, but you're out of luck. So this person had passed the CFE. This was the only thing preventing them from getting their CPA. And the PER team said, you're not going to get CPA because you met your deadline and you didn't get level 2s. So the student was like, was this a waste of time? Like, I'm never going to become a CPA. So we wrote a letter to CPA PER reviewers and we asked for an extension. And of course, they were nice enough to grant it. All they're asking for you is just to write a letter and they will extend you for as much as needed to get there. So if anybody here is super stressed about the deadlines, don't worry about it. The PER team is quite reasonable. And if you give them a good example or a good reason why you're late, they will give you extension. Ideally, you don't want to get to that point. Ideally, you want to get your PER done way in advance. But if you want an extension, yes, they will do that. The best thing for you to do is just to be upfront with the PER team, send them an email asking for it, and that should be okay. For your specific example, you said that you need to finish by 2026 and you clear CFE by 2025. So I think you should be okay. But if you have any like admin questions like that, send it over to PER team. They can give you answers. A student asked me about penalties. They're saying if I submit a PER report late, do I get penalized? Yeah, if you miss a mentor meeting, and I believe submit a PER report late, you get 1 extra month that you have to report. So typically you need 30 months to graduate from PER. But if you miss a mentor meeting or you submit your reports late, they're going to make it like more than 30 months. They're going to make it like 31 months, 32 months, and things like that. So yes, you will get penalized if you keep missing your meetings and submitting it late. This specific student was saying that they have not submitted any reports since they began Core 1 in 2020. Why not? I know you've been busy with your studies, but as soon as you begin PEP, you got to start doing this PER reports every 6 months. You got to submit 1 report. We're almost at 2022 right now, so you're really behind. So I think you should sit down one week, like put a week, and now during the holiday break is a perfect time, and just keep writing a bunch of examples. And as I said, I can support you with my program. If you want to join, go for it. If you want to do it yourself, you're more than welcome to. But just make sure to submit it ASAP. That's important. I passed the CFE and I'm really struggling with PER. I would really appreciate if you can give me one-on-one help. So pretty much the same question that came up earlier. Step number 1, I would say register for my program. It's got 30 plus examples. 30 plus full PER reports. That's what I'm talking about, like full PER section examples. In addition to that, there's like hundreds of specific like areas you need to report on. Like for example, what are complex transactions? What are some budgeting examples? There's like hundreds of those. 100 plus of those you can touch on. So I would suggest join my program, check it out, try to do it yourself. And if you struggle, you can send it to me and I can review it and we can submit it together. So of course, that's an option. A question saying, how long do you have to do PER? What is the deadline? The deadline is 7 years from the start of PEP, of Core 1, basically. So 7 years when you begin Core 1, you have to submit PER. You have to finish PER. Students asking about the program. They're saying, how does your program help with EVR? Are those example reports included? Yeah, like I said, so basically my program is just video lessons where I teach what PER reviewers are looking for. But I think the most beneficial thing for you guys will be the like every single section, every single example that I go through. So I said in the beginning, there's 20 technical and 5 enabling. For every single one of them, I go through them step by step in like videos that are 20 to 30 minutes in long. And I explain exactly what to report here. And I walk through an actual level 2 example in every area, in technical and enabling and so on. So yes, there's examples on all areas. Sometimes you have multiple examples. Like I have 2 examples for some of the finance and FR areas so that you have some options to go by. And by using those examples, you can report yourself. So the students who sign up for it, they like it. I think it'll help you guys. Check it out. If you want to do it yourself, I'm totally fine with that. I created this program to help you out, but yeah, it does have a lot of examples. All right, so I get a couple more questions. I switched from company A to company B. Most of my EVR is from company B. Do I need to submit change of job assessment? If you began reporting in company A, then yes, you should report it. You said most of your job is in company B. So did you report at all in company A? If you didn't, then like don't worry about it. You don't have to report it, but if you begin reporting company A and you change jobs in the middle, you got to submit a report for the first one and then the second one. The advantage of doing this is that you have progression. Even if in company A, your previous job, you're all at level 0, in your next report, there will be like a progression of how you're moving up. You begin at level 0, then you went to level 1 and level 2, and then went up there. So when you change your jobs, it's a really good idea to report all your experiences. That way you have that progression. Yeah, the student was asking me about changing jobs from company A to company B, said that their PER has only job description for company A. Yes, you do. You have to submit a job description for company B. All right, hold on. Let me just teach you the basics. So when you begin your PER, when you begin your CPA studies and you get registered for PERT, whatever company you're working for, you have to submit your job description to the CPA PERT team so they can approve that your position is good to go. And then once you do that, you have to report every 6 months in that company. If you change your jobs in the middle of your reporting, you have to submit a new job description for the next company, okay? And then you have to submit another one for the previous company for all your experience up to the change of job. So you can have the new report, old report, and you submit both of them. And then you begin submitting in the new company, you submit reports in that new area. Okay, does it help you? A student is saying, should we submit job description with every report? No, you don't have to. You have to submit a job description only once. The point of submitting your job description is to tell the CPA reviewers like what company you're working for. Once they know what company you're working for, you don't have to do it again because they already know you're in that company. What the PERT team is going to do is every time you submit a report, they're going to check your experience against your job description, and it has to support it. For example, if your job title is, let's say, a controller or a financial controller or something along those lines, but you're reporting under tax and audit all the time, and you have like these amazing examples, right? And you're like, wow, I'm at level 2. They're going to look at your job description and they'll look at it and be like, well, this person's title is financial controller, but they're reporting under tax. It doesn't really make that much sense. So you submit it only once, and your job description is quite important because they use it to give you level 2. And the student is saying that my job description slightly changes over time. If it's a slight change, then I would say, no, don't submit it. I'm really surprised that your job changes every 6 months because that would be very interesting. No, you don't have to submit it. Unless it like changes substantially, then you should submit a new job description. Otherwise, don't bother doing that. One trick I can tell you is this. If you're submitting an experience that is not related to your job description because maybe you got promoted to a new level, write in your PER report, this is part of my career progression, like something along those lines, okay? So on the bottom of your PER, say, I participate in this example as a special project as part of my career progression. A student saying, should we write a summary of meeting with the mentor every 6 months? No, you don't. The mentor has to write the summary. You don't write a summary. So every 6 months, when you get your supervisor to approve your report and you meet your mentor, you're supposed to discuss with your mentor your enabling skills and how you're progressing. Your mentor is not someone who can help you write those reports. CPA Canada is saying they're supposed to help you, but in my experience, mentors are not knowledgeable enough to help you submit those reports. You simply discuss with them your career, your progression, etc. And this mentor goes to a different PERT called the mentor PERT. And in there, they write down your meeting, the summary, etc. But you don't write any of that stuff. It's with the mentor to do that. How hard is it under EVR to write reports if the position is staff accountant in public CA firm? Not that hard. I mean, there are specific requirements for public CPA firms. Number one, you'll be reporting under audit or tax, depending what stream you're under. You need some billable hours before you get to level 2. People in industry and corporate don't have billable hours. They just have to give examples. But if you're in public practice, there are specific billable hours you need, about 425 billable hours before you can get to level 2. And if you're under tax route, you need NTR or notice to readers before you can get to level 2. So that'll be the challenge for you under public practice and if you're under EVR.